They've really captured the look of these improved precedents so well. Hi there to you, hope I find you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you to this extra special video here on the channel, up here in the loft on Weir Yard. And well, we've had the great electric train show weekend, and at the end of that I was able to snag a couple of interlopers to borrow to put through their paces here on Weir Yard. It's the Improved Precedent Class that's been made as a joint collaboration between Bachmann, Rails of Sheffield and the National Railway Museum, with 4 different versions of this historic locomotive coming to us in model form. I've got 2 of them, and I'm going to be putting them through their paces here on Weir Yard in an exclusive, the first time a YouTuber has got their hands on these models to put them through their paces on a real-world model layout. We're also going to be doing a full DCC fitting of this model, and I believe that this is the first time anybody has shown how to DCC fit them, and we'll be using a Train-O-Matic 21-pin decoder. We've got links down below that take you to Rails of Sheffield to pick up your own version of the improved precedents, and also to Train-O-Matic for the decoder used in today's video. So without further ado, and in association with Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, let's take a really good close look at some amazing models. The level of interest that was apparent when these locomotives were announced really was huge. The Improved Precedent is a locomotive made famous by Hardwick, which is the preserved example at the National Railway Museum. But they owe their designs right back to when Frank Webb was trying to make a much faster and much more reliable locomotive that really could fly the flag for the London and North Western Railway in that race to the north that saw ultimately Hardwick set a record of just over 67 miles per hour average that was to last for 40 years, and that secured the locomotive its place in the National Railway Museum. But in terms of a mainstream model, these locomotives were pretty much all withdrawn by 1934, with the exception of Hardwick, so none of them lasted long enough to see British rail service, and actually even by 1934 they were considered fairly antiquated. The fact that we've now got a model really is testament to how far the technology has moved along, that these locomotives are now a viable proposition. There are 2 locomotives that Rails of Sheffield have very kindly loaned to me to be able to do this review, and this is a partnership between the National Railway Museum, Bachmann and of course Rails of Sheffield. There are 4 different versions that are being released. 3 of these are being offered through Rails of Sheffield, and the 4th one represents the preserved Hardwick in the condition that it is seen in today in the museum. The Rails of Sheffield trio, of which I have 2 of here, include a service London and North Western Railway livery as Lucknow number 1673, and this is the locomotive as it would have appeared right back during the actual ownership and frontline service with the London and North Western Railway. Catalogue number 35-161Z. Over here we have catalogue number 35-162Z, and this is the Improved Precedent, but in the LMS Crimson as number 5036 Novelty. And again, this is a service livery, but certainly for me this is the livery that really does stand out, probably far more than any others. They're also offering a 3rd example in the LMS Black livery, but I don't have one of those to look at here. It's listed as having a 21-pin DCC socket, and we're going to be doing a full DCC fitting guide in association with today's sponsor, Train-O-Matic, and I'm going to be using one of their 21-pin decoders and showing you just how easy it is to fit a decoder into these models. Just going to move this box to one side and let's see what we get in the packaging. It comes in this rather unique slip case, which has a full history of the class on the back, and just a line drawing on the front, and it's sure to stand out in this packaging on the shelves. Inside, it's a much more standard Bachmann package. Just going to slide that out. And one of the things that we're starting to see now with some of these smaller, older type design locomotives is that we're getting an extra pair of driving wheels. Now, the whole purpose of this is that the locomotive comes pre-fitted with a set of drivers that have traction tyres on in an attempt to increase its pulling capacity. But for those collectors who don't want traction tyres on their locomotives, Bachmann are supplying in the box an appropriate set of driving wheels which do not have the traction tyres or the groove in the wheels to take them. We also have the water scoop there from the tender, and also what looks to be a lamp in there too. Looking underneath, we also have a set of etched nameplates and number plates as well, although the locomotive model does come with all of these printed on, and actually most modelers may not really find it necessary to add these, but they are included as standard. Freeing the locomotive from its clamshell blister, let's just put these to one side. As this is a loaner model from Rails of Sheffield, I'm not going to open up the detail bag and fit anything. But what is immediately apparent is that for a small locomotive, there is a great deal of weight in the locomotive itself. It seems to incorporate an awful lot of metal parts in order to keep that weight up, and in addition, we've also got a plug of lead in the boiler here too, and pretty much every spare bit of space has been filled up with ballast weight, which is really quite important. The tender 2 features an all-metal casting here in the top. It's held in place by this water filler in the centre, and if you do want to take this out, underneath there is a modelled representation of the empty tender, but you have to take out the water filler to be able to remove it, so it does mean it doesn't fall out willy-nilly when you turn the locomotive upside down. Looking to the rest of the model, it really is exquisite. What I do really like about these is we've got that very characteristic cut-out framing there. You can see the spokes of the wheels through, and they've really captured the look of these improved precedents so well. The whole running plate of this model is metal, and you can really feel that when lifting it up. As I said before, we do have etches of the number and the nameplates on there, but I actually personally feel that the quality of the printing is such that for me, when I buy my own version of these, I'm not really actually inclined to go to the trouble of fitting those. If you do though, it does recommend something like a light PVA glue. Don't use anything with solvents in, and just take your time and be careful. The rest of the lining is exquisitely done on this example, and I've got every faith that Hardwick, the preserved example from the Railway Museum, will also be done to a similar really high standard. The sheen on this black is perfectly captured. It's a kind of nearly black is the best way I can describe it. I'm not sure what Bachmann have done to be able to get this effect, but I do believe that the London and North Western Railway livery did involve a very small amount of something like Prussian blue in the black, just to give it a not quite black effect. I'm going to bring in now the other livery example that I've got, which is the LMS Maroon. Now, in my view, this is the sleeper hit of the 4 that have initially been announced. It wasn't something that from the livery rendition pictures that particularly stood out to me, but seeing the model in the flesh, this for me really is a massive standout. The lining again is exquisite with that Midland Railway style, but this maroon really does set off the entire locomotive, far more so than I would have ever expected it to, and certainly makes it a much more attractive livery than the London and North Western Railway variant. Looking to the model, one thing which is a little bit of a minor detraction for me, but is common to the Bachmann locomotives all across the range, is that the locomotive and tender are not permanently coupled together. They are attached by wires, but it's free to just slip the coupling. It just fits over a kind of nubbin there on the tender. And I personally always feel that it would be improved by having a screw on the tender end just to help protect those wires from getting pulled. It features pickups from not just the driving wheels, but also the front pony truck, and also 2 of the 3 axles on the tender feature wiper style pickups to the centre of the axle. So there's no real drag, but they just really do help this model. The coupling on the tender is a slimline NEM pocket, which fits in this self-centering mechanism that we've seen on a number of coaches and wagons from Bachmann, but it's nice to see it make an appearance here on the tender of a locomotive, just to help it to negotiate bends without suffering buffer lock with the stock it is pulling. The buffers on this locomotive are really nicely done. They're very distinctive on these locomotives. So we can see there, captured perfectly. They've got a kind of squat look to them. They're not sprung loaded, but really it doesn't bother me in the slightest. The vacuum hose there is fitted as standard, but it doesn't have the coupling hook in there. We just get a hole where it can be added in should you desire to. Printing on the back, again, exquisite. We've got the London and North Western Railway number, I think that is 3069, which would have been this locomotive's original London and North Western Railway number. These locomotives were officially rebuilds, even though they didn't really have anything to do with the previous class of locomotives that they replaced, but that was for accounting purposes, because essentially if they were rebuilds, the money came from a different line on the accounting spreadsheets, and it's all about how much tax you can claim back, which was the reason why not just the London and North Western Railway, but a number of other railway companies used to do this when getting rid of old locomotives. They would probably keep one token piece, and then they could put them down as being rebuilds rather than new builds. On the underside there, we can see the traction tyres sit on the rear of the sets of wheels, and the front set of wheels have quite a degree of lateral movement, and also they can move from side to side to accommodate any undulations in the track. The front face of the locomotive has all of the characteristic web accoutrements, with a very characteristic London and North Western Railway smokebox dart design, which actually is something which looks very continental to my eyes, but is something that was quite common across a number of different locomotives, including the web coal tank that we've already seen from Bachmann. Rivet detail on the locomotive is really nicely done, and the paint finish, helped by an awful lot of metal parts on there, is second to none. Between the frames we also have the representation of the motion, and this really does improve the model no end. Front springs there, separately added detail, and then we've got all of those really nice extra details. Just let me see if I can just part those from each other. Inside the cab you can see that we have got a whole host of separately applied detail. The cab glazing is flush both inside and outside, and that really is exquisite. These locomotives are actually quite tiny. Just to put it into perspective for you, I've laid them out here And I'm just going to introduce a Bachmann Class 3 shunter, and you can see straight up that the size of the locomotive is about comparable with that Class 3 shunter. Of course, they could go much faster, and indeed Hardwicke was able to keep up an average of just over 67 miles per hour on that race to the north, which ensured her preservation 40 years later. In terms of the tender itself, these are a really interesting design. The wheel spacing, it can be seen there, is almost a little bit peculiar compared with more modern steam locomotives. We have the rearmost axle actually almost at the very back of the tender, with the flange of the wheel just protruding just slightly beyond where the main tender body goes to, and I've never really seen that on a tender before. So this isn't a rehash of any other standard design of tender. Everything about this is completely new from the ground up. I really do like this rivet detail around the water tank on there, and we've also got quite a lot going on the tender sole bars, and you can see where the W-irons and springs from the wheels have the correct riveted representation above. The locomotive also comes with a front NRM pocketed slimline tension lock coupling, and this can quite easily be removed. And in fact, if you do remove this, it reveals one of the screws that you need access to be able to remove the body from the locomotive. I was actually quite surprised how easy this was to do. Even though the actual 21-pin decoder socket is in the tender, it is remarkably easy to get inside this locomotive. And it's also quite testament to the cunning design on this that you can also remove the rear wheel set to swap it over with the non-traction tyre version that the product comes with without having to fully dismantle the model. So it's just little things like that which just show an attention to detail. The front buffers are, again, they're not sprung and are a completely different design to those ones on the tender at the back, and I can only conclude that these more spindly affairs were because it was not really expected that the front end of the locomotive was going to be buffering up to an awful lot much of the time. So we've got heavy duty on the rear of the tender and just in case on the front there. You can also see some more of that exquisite lining. It really is nicely done. The locomotive also features these sort of valances at the side as well, and again they're really well finished on there. We've also got metal sandpipes there up against the wheels, and all of the brake gear comes factory fitted. In fact, most of it's moulded onto the firebox cowling underneath, so that it's purely cosmetic, such that it makes it very easy to remove the keeper plate to change over those wheels. Moving back over to the London and North Western Railway example, again, I think on this one it's even more noticeable the motion in between the frames, picked out in that kind of gunmetal silver. It really is exquisite. The inside of the cab as well, we have completely different detailing picked out on the back head, and it really does look nice. One of the other details which I've noticed on these, which really is quite nice, is that the full plate between the locomotive and tender is fully posable, and it's quite a robust assembly. And what it means is that you can get it to sit absolutely flat in there, and it has the full degree of movement there so that your crew aren't going to fall down the gap. Really nicely done. These locomotives offer an awful lot of detail. The closer you look, the more there is. But really, for me, the absolute standouts are the finishing on that London and North Western Railway crest. The nameplates as well. Even though that's just printed, they have come up so well. We do have an etched version too, but I personally don't think it needs it. But it's nice to know that they are there for those who prefer to fit their own etched plates. The number plate as well, really nicely done. And I particularly like these sweeping curves on the running plate, with these holes through that you can just see the spokes of the wheels, and as it runs you can also see the connecting rods moving around. The connecting rods themselves have a hexagonal nut. They are actually quite nice and subtle, finished in the correct colour, and if you want to be able to gain access to change that rearmost set of wheels, it's quite simple. First up, we just remove the front coupling, and this is just purely so we can get some better access, and then there are a number of different screws just to very carefully take out. Be very careful, you don't want to lose any of these. 2 at the back. Don't undo the centre one at the back because that is just for removing the locomotive body. There's 3 down the centre, and then the final 2 are either side at the front, and you don't need to do anything with that centre screw. Again, that's the front screw that holds the locomotive body on. And then it's just simply a case of very, very carefully lifting that out. Put that down there, and then the wheels just slide up. You can see on there the bearings that slide down into the frame. I'm not going to take these out, but you can see where the replacement wheel sets, seen here, are just a drop-in fit once you carefully unscrew those hexagonal nuts on either side. The pickups themselves, they are just a push fit onto these tabs here. So if I just very, very carefully place that there, what I want to show you is that we've got a very, very interesting mechanism there. And this also means that should you need to adjust these pickups, it's really, really easy. Just take the keeper plate out and you can bend these down if you need to. But actually on both of these models I found that they are pre-adjusted to the optimum position. Refitting the keeper plate is just simply the reverse of the process. Just taking a little bit of care just to make sure that these pickups are all lining up properly. Push that down and then retighten all the screws. They don't need over torquing, but just keep doing that until they're all back in place. Removing the body, should you need to, is also really simple. There's just 2 screws, front and back, there, and also there. You do not need to take out the keeper plate to do this. And then if we turn that over, the entire locomotive body just lifts off the top. And there is a huge weight to this, you can see there. We do have a lead plug, it seems, down inside the boiler. We've also got a large casting there at the back. And this locomotive is perfectly balanced so that it does get good adhesion for its size. The motor itself is just there sitting on top of a easily accessible worm gear for lubrication that leads down through a series of gears to drive the front of the 2 sets of driving wheels. I'm going to come now to the DCC fitting portion of this review, and for this I'm going to take Novelty and I'm going to show you how to get inside to fit a decoder. Now this is a little bit more involved, I'm guessing, because being quite a small Victorian locomotive prototype, there's a lot less space, it's more cramped underneath. So first things first, to gain access to the screws in the tender that we need to remove the tender top, we need to actually really remove this rearmost set of wheels. Now it does come out fairly easily. That's not to say that they're loose in there, it just means that they have made them so it is fairly straightforward to remove them. We can then see in there the pickups in the centre, that self-centering mechanism on the coupling, and as well we've got the 2 screws just hidden away there on each side at the back. So we're going to go in for the small crosshead jeweler's screwdriver, and very, very carefully we're just going to undo one, and then we're going to undo the other. Turning the locomotive back over is just simply a case of removing that tender top, and it just comes away there quite readily. And you can see there the design of the inside of the tender is actually quite roomy. But don't worry about being able to fit in something like a sound speaker. This locomotive comes with a speaker pre-fitted. So if you want to add in a aftermarket sound option, it's simply a case of getting a 21-pin decoder with the appropriate sound file preloaded to it, fitting it, and the actual speaker is already taken care of. To get out the blanking plate, just very, very gently rock it from side to side, lift it up, and then I've got here the Train-O-Matic 21-pin decoder, and just pay careful attention to the pins there, and you'll see just down here at the bottom corner the one pin on its own, and that we very carefully line up with the locomotive itself. And then once you're happy that it's on the headers, we're just going to very, very carefully rock it from side to side, push it down home, and there we have the decoder in place. There's also ample room inside here if you wish to fit something like the Smart Power Pack, and they are quite easy to solder in if you take a look at one of our previous videos outlining the fitting of the Smart Power Pack to the Train-O-Matic decoders. Now that we've got all that in place, pay careful attention to these hooks at the front of the tender. We need to just make sure that they go through, hook into place, and then the back of the tender just drops down into position. If we turn the whole assembly upside down and then look to refit the screws. And the second screw. Really, really easy. We then get that wheel set, and with the wheel set removed, you can just see there just how nice that yellow lining is, and it really does make these look something special. And it doesn't matter which way round these go in, just fit it into the W irons on one side, and then with a very gentle pressure push aside the W irons and let it drop into place, and it's as easy as that. We're now fully DCC fitted. By default that will be at locomotive ID number 3, but we can put it on the programming track and reset it to whatever number that you require. Personally, I would recommend the locomotive running number 5036, which the decoder will quite happily store, and then it's just a case of glancing at the locomotive to remind yourself which number you have it on. Personally, I don't find that these need a Smart Power Pack, but if you do, as said before, there's plenty of room within the tender to be able to add one of those in. When it comes to running, these locomotives performed reasonably well on Weir Yard. Now, Weir Yard is noted for its up and down gradients, and on the main running lines, both of these locomotives handled the train that I gave them quite happily. Now, I didn't really load them up with long trains, and I don't actually know how well they would perform with the regular wheel sets, with these being a lone set of review models. I didn't want to delve in and start changing wheels because I didn't want to risk scratching the paint finish on any of these wheel nuts. It also should be noted that you don't appear to get the tool in the box to allow you to natively do that, so you would be using something like a set of needle-nosed pliers, and I decided that this wasn't something that was within the scope of this review given the loaned nature of the models. When it came to gradients, the locomotives could handle themselves on anywhere up to 5% gradients with the rubber traction tired wheels, but when it came to pulling anything up that, they really did start to struggle. That said, these locomotives would never have been tasked to run up steep grades. On the real railway, they would have made do with mainline gradients and would have handled those really quite well, and in model form they were perfectly capable of the fairly short length trains that we would task them to use. As I said in the Dcc fitting, the train-o-matic decoder fits perfectly into the tender and gives adequate room if you wish to add one of the smart power packs to that, and it's quite easy to just solder that in. Overall, I was really pleased with these locomotives, and I'm so pleased that Rails and the National Railway Museum in conjunction with Bachmann have finally plugged this hole in the ready-to-run market. Suitable rolling stock for these locomotives would include both the Hornby as well as the forthcoming Hatton's Genesis coaches, particularly in the London and North Western Railway livery, such as those you see here. These are absolutely exquisite and really do set off the locomotives such as Lucknow or indeed Hardwick from the National Railway Museum. Of special note, Hatton's Genesis LMS liveried coaches are looking to be something really special if those in the cabinet at Great Electric Train Show are anything to go by, and will be the perfect accompaniment to this particular liveried locomotive. Be sure to order them too, because they're sure to sell out very quickly when these hit the market. We've got a link down below to help you find both the LMS and the London and North Western Railway liveried coaches from Hatton's, so be sure to get your pre-orders for those in as well. When it comes to scores, first up is build quality, and I've actually found these to be really well made. As loaner review samples, these have been very well handled, and finding my way around them, including doing the Dcc fitting, also throwing them around Weir Yard, they have stood up incredibly well, and I've not had a single piece of detail fall off either of these models. So there's not really anything to fault, and I'm going to give these a 10 out of 10. When it came to running quality, this was probably the Achilles heel of the model. With different brands of DCC decoders, I did experience some degree of jerky running, but it was perfectly possible to find a decoder out of the box that they would work quite happily with. On the level, or at least as level as Weir Yard can offer, they did pull a respectable number of coaches, but when it came to gradients, they could handle themselves up those, but really struggled with pulling too much behind them under those circumstances. Getting round corners, these locomotives had no problems whatsoever, even down to radius 1, and in one case slightly under. There was no sign of derailments or flange climbing, and they coped incredibly well with all manner of point work, from double slips through three-way points and diamond crossings, with no great issues at all. So overall, I'm going to give them a 7.5 out of 10. On DCC Fitting and Innovation, I really like the fact that the speaker comes pre-fitted, and that means that if you want to go down the sound route, you can just load in your 21-pin decoder, and it's really easy to do. They are available with a sound fitted option, but do hurry because these are selling incredibly quickly. But it is the easiest way to get the appropriate sound fitting on your locomotive. Overall, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. On accuracy and quality of finish, these are exquisite museum quality models. There really is nothing to fault. The lining is perfect, straight, true, where it needs to be. Even the printing for the nameplates and numbers, even though they give you an etched nameplate and number plate, is really good. And they've captured that Victorian paint finish so well. There really wasn't any area on the paint finish that I could fault on these, so I've got no hesitation to give these another 10 out of 10. When it came to value for money, these are quite expensive, it has to be said. Weighing it at £220 for the basic DCC ready locomotive, it is starting to push the upper end of what we've started to see coming through from manufacturers. But wait a minute, you get an incredible locomotive for that money. This is something which, even a few years ago, we could never have dreamed of getting a locomotive to this standard of this prototype. And time again, what it comes down to is, could you build a kit to this standard, get it to run to this standard, to paint and finish it to this standard, and come in at under the £220 budget? These are surefire best sellers. I predict these as being quite possibly the locomotive that takes Model of the Year in next year's award ceremonies. And whilst these models are expensive, they are far cheaper than if you'd had to build one yourself. And really, even at £220, you get a lot for your money, and these do still offer value for money. And I'm going to give these 8 out of 10. That brings us to a very healthy 46.5, and that is a great score from a really exquisite model. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video, and we've got some affiliate links down below that take you to Rails of Sheffield to be able to order both of the locomotives featured today, and also that third one in the LMS Black. So do go and check them out. They're selling incredibly fast on pre-order, so don't hesitate or you will miss out. I'm told at the time of recording that they're going to be here next month. That's November 2021. But it was really generous of Rails to loan me these 2 models to get a good close look on your behalf. You can also head on over to Patreon and help us to make the videos that you really want to see. And we've got the full range of merchandise for the channel as well available, from t-shirts to hoodies to mugs. And of course, we've got a link too for the exclusive Jenny Monday Club Acura Scale wagon, which is on the verge of selling out at Rails of Sheffield, but certainly you can still just snag one if you're quick, and it may be one to add to your order for that improved precedent. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Graham Foster, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, and Alan Dickerson. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.